Recently, the News Minute published a story about a serial killer called Ripper Jayanandan. He is infamous in Kerala as Ripper Jayanandan, though his real name is just Jayanandan. He has been in jail for almost 7 to 9 murders. Nidhish, who did the story, can correct me on the number. And just when he was supposed to come out on parole, Nidhish published a story which said that Jayanandan had been acquitted already in 3 murder cases. And Nidhish looked very intensely at one particular murder case, the murder of a woman called Devaki in a village called Puthenvelikkara in Thrissur. And what Nidhish found was that many of the evidences which the police used in the lower court, in the high court, and then the Supreme Court, where he was eventually given life imprisonment, are questionable. This is a story which created a lot of ripples within Kerala. People started questioning, is the justice system working properly? Is the police building cases properly? Is a lot of torture being employed? Because the story had the confession of a police officer who spoke about how extensively, torture methods were used on Jayanandan. Didesh, tell me, what were the main findings of your story?
So we didn't had a headline and then chase a story according to that headline. We write the headline at the very last. We followed the prosecution case. We followed the police case. Police had some major 4 or 5 circumstantial evidence. There was no scientific evidence. Circumstantial evidence that made it look like this guy was the killer. So we followed those 4 or 5 main pieces of evidence. Those were like, for example, gold was stolen, gold jewelry was stolen from the house. And the police said the Jayanandan had pledged this gold in a particular pawn shop and then later went and sold it. So, you can, and Jayanandan led the police to that pawn shop and they recovered the evidence from there.
So, just to recollect for the audience, a woman named Devaky is murdered. Her gold is stolen.
Yep.
And the police said that Jayanandan had given the gold to a pawn shop and they recovered from the pawn shop and they gave it to the court.
Yeah. So and then when the gold was evidence in the court, Devaki's family identifies that this was the same gold that was stolen. But when we went and spoke to Devaki's relatives, they were like, no, this was not the gold that was stolen. Police had us believe that the gold that was stolen was melted by the time when they went for evidence recovery. But if we present that melted gold in the court, it wouldn't stand as a strong evidence. So we'll present some other gold jewelry, fake gold jewelry. You will have to admit that this is the same gold. This is not us saying, this is the family's relative saying. Then the other question is, but still the gold jewelry staffers, the pawn shop guys, told in court that they had actually seen Jayanandan coming there and selling their all these things. They are actually giving the exact date and time of witnessing Jayanandan coming over there and selling the gold. So we went and spoke to the pawn shop guys, and they were like, boss, none of this hasn't happened. The police, the owner of the pawn shop just told us that, this is what we have to say in the court. The police had some understanding with the owner. Now the entire thing turns murky. Then we realized
So this murder happened in which year?
2006.
2006 the murder happens and this man has been in jail for this many years.
17 years.
And now the pawn shop employees are saying that, no, we never saw him. The one employee who spoke to you said
His exact words, the first time he saw Jayanandan was when he was produced in court. When this guy had gone to court for, giving witness statement. But in the court statement, he had seen Jayanandan like for some 3-4 times before that. When Jayanandan allegedly came for, pawning this gold first and then selling this gold and all that. But this guy is saying none of this thing happened. So he basically, made a fake statement in court.
So the gold was fake. Perhaps the pawn shop employees were made to give false statements. What were the other things that you uncovered?
There were like 2-3 major other circumstantial evidence. The police said Jayanandan was identified by a woman who lives next door to Devaki's house. And there was a robbery in her house a day before the murder. And she had seen Jayanandan. She identified Jayanandan in prison when he was arrested. We went and met this person. She was like, she hadn't actually seen the face of this attacker, but she saw the peculiar features of the face. And she realized that the guy is of some short height because he was peering at her from a particular height from the door. And I asked her, you identified Jayanandan a year after this thing happened. So Jayanandan was arrested in 2006, but she identifies him in 2007. And she had only seen this attacker for a small glimpse of a time, like in the middle of the night. So we didn't want to like interrogate her again. Of course, her memory wouldn't be like so better after these 17 years what it was in 2006. But we politely asked her like, what, how can you tell us like, can you tell us how really you identified? And she was like, this guy's name, this guy's face was all over the papers. So I was pretty sure that it was easy for me to identify. Then a very serious thing we discovered was something that the police never took care of and the defense counsel also didn't care of, was that the police said the guy, the dress he used during the attack while he was murdering Devaki was recovered from Jayanandan's house and it was bloodstained. But in the court judgment itself, the appendix of the court judgment itself has this chemical analysis report of the dress which said there is no blood stain in it. Yeah.
Okay. So just to just sum it up all for the audience, when we hear the story of a serial killer, of someone like Ripper Jayanandan, journalists like me, people in the audience like you, we all feel outraged. We immediately want justice. We want to find out who the culprit is. So the police was under a lot of pressure in 2006 to find the criminal, and they go and zero in on Jayanandan, who's a fisherman. What Nidhish finds many years later is that in this one particular case, let me remind you that Jayanandan has already been acquitted in 3 cases. In this one case that he was convicted, Nidhish finds that the evidences were questionable. So Deepta Mondal, my colleague, was the person who edited the story. So Deepta, why is what Nidhish said really important? Because is our job as journalists to really declare someone innocent or guilty?
Yeah, so the answer is twofold. I mean, why is it important? I would say, why is it important for journalism as a profession per se? It's exciting for me to see a story like this because of how crime reporting is done in this country, right? You know very well that reporters often act as messengers of the establishment. So somebody is caught, they're produced in front of the media is allowed to run riot with a trial. And this case is a great example of what happens when a media trial happens and how the real trial gets influenced perhaps by the media trial. Because I can imagine the pressure, I'm not attributing any motives to the judges, but I can imagine what kind of pressure they would have been under to convict this guy. Because in the eyes of the public, the police had already put out enough material out there to get the public to think that this is the man. And in the case of the witnesses that he referred to, that confirmation bias that we speak about, where they believe that they were doing the right thing by giving false testimonies, right? And that is what, and that this is why we say that the media is both a powerful and a dangerous entity, right? And so that's the first thing for me, which is important in this. The fact that it is a counter to the regular way in which crime stories are reported and how journalists do this. So for me, for a journalist to come and do this kind of story was such an uplifting thing. It was a morale booster,
So, Nidhish, one important question which I'm sure people would like to ask you is that how did the police zero in on Jayanandan as the criminal for Devaki's murder? Because he then gets implicated in the other murders, right?
Yeah. So it's actually what we said in the story itself. They didn't really catch this guy. They stumbled upon this guy. There was this ex-convict. There was this criminal, a man with a criminal background who was telling the police that, look, boss, this guy might be, who you're looking for. And based on this hearsay, the police goes about and arrests this guy and makes him confess. There's this a detailed description of torture that's given to us by the cop who did the confession statement. And he talks about all this torture, and the end of which, the guy confesses. And based on that confession, they are then trying to build the case.
I want to talk about the torture. The torture is a very important thing in the story, right?
Yeah.
In a society like Kerala, where any torture case is taken so seriously and become headlines, back in 2006, was Jayanandan's torture not known?
So back in 2006, the first thing that happened, I guess, is when the police picked this guy, made him confess, and then brought him to the Ernakulam Press Club and paraded him in front of the media and said, and they leaked the confession statement also to the media. And immediately the media buys this theory. Nobody is kind of, thinking about questioning the police version. Nobody is reaching out to Jayanandan's family and asking them, is your husband such a man? Is your husband going out at night? Is your husband... They don't really know anything about the man except that, the guy was a brutal murderer according to the police. And this theory, once it becomes a major narrative, then over a period of time, the problem that I faced in this story was everybody who I was speaking to was very convinced that this guy is a ripper. That they were so convinced that they would perjure themselves in the court in order to make it the truth. So you create
Because
a
they
myth.
believe that they were getting justice.
Yeah, so you create a myth first, and then you cherry pick facts according to that myth, or you basically make up facts in order to make that myth stand. So it's like a major narrative out in the. It's a truth, yeah, that you manufacture, and then everything is kind of very conveniently stacked up to make that truth stand. Yeah.
Can I say a quick thing over here? So in the earlier question also you asked us as to whether this means he's innocent. And this is one thing that is a point of creative conflict between Nidish and I when we were editing this piece, right? Which is that our job is not to prove his innocence. In fact, what this story by Nidish exposes is the lengths to which the police will go to put up evidence. It shows the quality of investigation in cases such as this. It shows how the people who we make movies about and show, there is any number of these hero cop kind of narratives, right? And the media as well as the movie industry and all of these narratives are full of this hero cop image. But this story kind of really exposes how shoddy, how incompetent they really are. So that is for me the bigger thing than whether this guy is innocent or not. This is the quality of the investigation. Look at that.
So was that also in the back of your mind all the time, that my story should point at the quality of investigation and trial, and I should never be the judge of the matter?
So it's really like, it's really a thing about the writing also, the man's writing abilities and the way the story gets edited. Like, I want the reader, after reading the whole story, I want the reader to stand where I stand right now after having this journey. Like, I know that a particular case, evidence was either shoddy or manufactured. So there is enough reason to kind of, question his conviction in that case. In other cases, this is what's happened. So I wanted the reader to be at that point. And also I figured out, the guy has a very complex personality. He's sharing some dark thoughts in his autobiographical memoir and all that.
And he
But
escaped from two
he escaped
prisons,
from
right?
prison like 2-3 times.
He
But two
starved
times.
himself so he can come through the bars.
Yeah, and the next time he cut the prison bars and then escaped via
But that
ladder.
can't be an ordinary person who does that.
That's the thing.
But is he a serial killer is the question.
That's the thing. That's
He's
the
not
thing.
an
Like,
ordinary person. He has all these problems, but is he a serial killer?
but I have a problem.
Answer for us to give is what my only thing is that, and I think we argued a lot.
Yeah,
about it.
I have a-
See, Nidish, will you allow me to say this?
Yeah.
That see, as a reporter, right, you spent a year on this story.
Yeah.
I would have found it difficult to detach myself emotionally from it. I would
That's
have found it difficult to detach myself from the thought that this guy must be innocent, not from becoming his votary.
Yeah.
Right. So for us, when we come into the editing function, when we bring that in, it's to kind of
Yeah.
sometimes control the reporter's urges also. Because did you feel at any time that
Were your
So
urges
that's-
controlled?
A lot, and that's what I'm so thankful to the whole team at News Minute. I know only you, Dinya edited, all these people. It went through a process. It went through a pipeline, and then what happened is, my earlier version, the 5,000 word version that I had really submitted. Now it's a 10,000 word version. My earlier version was something like, imagine a road without traffic lights. It was chaos. Dinya, you and others put traffic lights. You signal green, red, and all these things, and it became so much of a responsible journalistic piece after going through all this. I'll admit, like, I had my own intuitions, my own editorialization, and obviously, I'm also a human being. My emotions will come through in the story, consciously or unconsciously. It may be just a word. Like, I remember I wrote, inspired by Jayanandan's legal defense, Kirti became a lawyer. His daughter became a lawyer. And then I think Raga caught this. Raga said, do you want to use inspire or agitated? I said, agitated, that's the word I want. And I was so happy. I mean, even if she was pointing out my mistake, I was so happy that thing happened. And Denia wanted me to, when I wrote the 5,000 piece, she wanted me to add a lot of stuff. Like, she wanted me, all those things that the witness are saying to me, that they have been given false testimonies and all that. She wanted me to quote their actual testimony from the court statement and then play up the contrast. So I was like so happy to do that. But my only concern was that it would be like, 1,000, 2,000 words addition. She was like, even if it's 10,000 words, I don't care, but without it, the story won't go. And I was so happy that an editor is there to say all these things so that it goes through those traffic lights and eventually, order is restored
And
and
I'm
the
so
peace.
happy that there is a newsroom like this where these kind
Yeah.
of things
No,
are taken
so
seriously.
first we have to talk about Project 39A also, which
Yeah.
brought this
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah.
They are actually part of the National
Yeah.
Law University in Delhi,
Yeah.
right? And they look at convicts who are on death penalty. They go back to judgments. They help them. They give legal help. It is in this process that they discovered Jayanandan. My final question to all of you is that this is an experiment in Indian journalism. It has been done in America quite a few times, and people who are convicted have been acquitted with these. Most of you have heard of this podcast called a Serial, through which a man was acquitted. So, what were your concerns legally? Because this is the first time that we are having a story where we are questioning the police and the judiciary, not just lower court, high court, and Supreme Court has heard this case.
Yeah, more than me, I think I can now safely disclose this thing. I had taken this story to two outlets before I came to the India Rajendran's News Minute, and this was also because NLU wanted it to be published in a print publication. Both those outlets rejected it, saying this is too risky a story for us. The first outlet said we won't take outside investigation as a policy. The second outlet said this is a major newspaper, national newspaper. Second outlet said it requires exhaustive work for vetting and verification, which we can't do. And then, but by that time I had already told Anilun and look, boss, this requires an editor who has a risk appetite. I don't want to like praise you in your own show.
No, you don't have to. But the point is, there is a legal risk,
There is a
right?
legal risk, and editors need to take this legal risk. I think if they are convinced with the story, and not just the version of the story that's submitted. I think my initial version was a very poor version, but you saw something in it. We all worked in it, and we made it a better copy because we wanted to do justice to the story. Not like we wanted to publish something dubious and say that we are questioning the court.
But Sudhir, the larger question is that should there be an atmosphere in India where journalists are not this scared of legal
Oh,
repercussions?
absolutely. No, so I've been accused of introducing caste into everything. Okay. In this discussion, also, let's accept that the Indian judiciary is made up of upper caste Hindu men, right? That they are the real fountainheads of this entire four-tiered democracy, Chaturvarna and four-tiered democracy.
Yeah.
So there is so much of overlap between how our ancient system was and how in today's time we have a bunch of people who are beyond question. That for me is the main thing that needs to be questioned. Now, why do I also bring up caste is because a majority of the under trials in India are either Dalit, Muslim, OBC or tribal, right? Jayanandan himself comes from an extremely marginalized community. In fact, that is one of the interventions that I'm very happy about. So Nidish had said he's from a marginalized community. I said, no, pull out what community, mention what. And I added just 2 lines over there saying that he's from a Kudubi group which is seeking scheduled caste status, which is a migrant population, which is, in fact, if somebody does a Google, they'll find out that they are quite ostracized also from the village community. So all these things were very important for me. And why are they important? Is not because it's a one-off case. Because we have, like, if you see this fantastic body of work that Sukanya Shanta put together on the under trial problem in India, she showed statistically that a majority of the people who get convicted, who are behind bars, are from these weaker communities. And therefore, we need more and more and more of this kind of work, okay, to crack open this myth that either the police or the judiciary is some arbiter of justice which is beyond question. They are arbiters of justice, but they're not beyond question.
Just to think, like, this is also something that I was really happy that the News Minute has this process having like so many edits. Like I wrote like 10 drafts or something by the time it was published, and then the previous day before it was published, there was a call from 1 o'clock in the noon to like 9 o'clock in the night where we read out each line in the story. And like 4 or 5 editors discussed each line in the story, edited it. And I think the beauty of it is also what Sudhir said. It's not just the story. You are taking a 2 step back and you are looking at the larger picture also here and there. So, in the story, you are mentioning Kudumbikas, we are mentioning a lot of other things so that the reader gets an overall picture. We are also saying this thing that, that there is this guy called Thambi, whose handler was a politician and a private financier, a pretty heavyweight in the local community. And because of that guy's influence, Thambi probably was not there in the witness stand. He was mentioned as a secret informant. Whereas Jayanandan, he doesn't have a political or a socio-economic powerhouse that is backing him, and he's an easy prey in that way. We're still not saying he's innocent, but still, these are things that matter. And we mentioned all these things in the story. Actually, the Kudumbi thing, Kudumbi thing was there in the initial draft, but then I thought, the editor won't like it. Maybe I have to cut down the words. So I removed it. And then Sunita asked me to reintroduce it. I enjoyed this product. It was a fun ride for me. It was an exhilarating ride.
So, to all those listening in, I strongly recommend that you read this very small 10,000 word story that Nidhish did. Not because this is an investigation that a journalist did for 1 year with the help of Project 39A, which the News Minute eventually carried, but it raises very stark questions about how our judiciary, how our police system functions. The intention of the story was never to say whether Jayanandan was innocent or guilty. The intention of the story is to ask questions. How does our judiciary function? How does our police function? And after reading the story, you should remember that Nidhish has a lot many more things in his bag which we have not allowed him to reveal. A lot more stories which we may bring out as a podcast. Maybe it'll become a movie or a series. We do not know. Yes, but Ripper Jayanandan story is one that you should read on the News Minute. And once again, do support independent journalism. Do support the News Minute. Thank you, Nidhish, and thank you, Steve.